Hi, I'm Christina Martin. I'm here speaking to Matt LaClair, who's been flown over from America by the National Secular Society to attend the Secularist of the Year Award, and now to speak to us about his experiences in trying to bring secularism to his school. So, Matt, hello. Nice
Hi.
to have you here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Good. Just to briefly introduce your story, your 11th grade history teacher used his classes essentially to preach, and when you resisted this, stood up to this, you met with, well, quite a lot of hostility and even a death threat, I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And can I just start by asking you, before you joined Mr. Paskovich's class, were you aware of his views at all?
Well, I remember that day when I went home and I had my schedule with me. It had all the names of what teachers I would have for the first semester. I went to high school there. And I saw the name Paskevich. I talked to my sister, who happened to be home from college, and she was with a bunch of her friends, and her friends laughed. And when I asked why, they said this was a teacher who often talked about his personal religious beliefs during class, but they thought it was funny because they got out of class, they didn't have to do any work. So when I entered, I thought maybe something was going on, but for the most part, I figured that if anything was seriously wrong here, somebody would have done something about it over the past, at the time I thought he was teaching for 10 years, apparently it was 14. So I'd assumed that if anything really bad was going on, it would have been taken care of. So when I walked into class, I was essentially, for the most part, open-minded. I try not to go in with any preconceived ideas, but I figured if anything was bad, it would have been taken care of.
Yeah, so this hadn't been dealt with before. No one had ever said anything seriously about it before, just jokes.
Not that I was aware of at the time, no.
And you obviously, in that case, weren't going in with a campaigning attitude in mind? Or
No. Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, it wasn't even until a couple days later that I decided to do something, so.
Okay. So when you first heard him air these views, what was the reaction of your classmates around you while you were sitting there in class?
Right. It was actually, I guess, sort of what I expected. For the most part, they were a little bit shocked at some of the things he was saying, and some of them you can see them almost chuckling because some of the stuff he was saying was just foolish.
Yeah.
And the students thought it as well. Not all of them, but most of them seemed to think it was pretty ridiculous. But as time went on, they started to take him more seriously, almost as if they were having a serious discussion, even though some of the claims he was making were ridiculous.
I understand he told one Muslim classmate they would be going to hell.
Well, actually, what happened was actually worse than that.
Yeah.
We do have a Muslim student in the school, and this particular student was actually referred to by the teacher, but she was not in that class.
All right.
In another class in our school, and during our class, the teacher said that, yeah, that this person's nice, but unfortunately they're going to hell.
That's nice.
And but unfortunately, when the story came out, that student was not angry with the teacher. That student was actually angry with me because that student liked the teacher as a person, even though he said something that awful during class.
Wow, that's amazing logic.
Yeah.
Were there any other non-Christian, not even atheists, just non-Christian pupils who felt aggrieved?
Right. Well, at the time, I wasn't really sure. I knew there were students who were not Christian in the class, but as far as what they were specifically, I don't really know. But even Christians were offended by some of the things that he said. Of course, not in the school, but outside of the school. I even received a letter from an evangelical preacher in Texas who wrote me and said, this teacher went way over the line, good for you for trying to stop him. So
yeah, it's not just non-Christians who would be offended by it, it represents them badly.
Right.
So when you began to speak out against your teacher, effectively using his classroom as a pulpit, did anyone come out and support you, or did anyone oppose you, even in your school?
In my school?
Yeah.
A lot of opposition. I didn't really have any public support. I had one teacher who eventually publicly supported me. Aside from that, not one. I didn't have a single student or a single teacher who came out and at the very least said, this teacher is going over the line.
Or I see your point.
Well, right. They never said that. Even someone like the department head of science, who is a great person. I've known him for a very long time, but he didn't say anything publicly either. So it was really interesting to see that, particularly because this teacher was saying things like evolution is unscientific. And in school, we're taught the theory of evolution as essentially it's a scientific fact.
Oh, yeah.
But no science teacher came out publicly and said, we don't like the fact that a U.S. history teacher in our school is telling the students that evolution is unscientific.
Did you ever have that conversation with any of the teachers, or is that just off limits, that conversation, that query?
It was off limits privately a little bit. There was a little bit of private support. But for the most part, even if it was private, they pretty much stopped the conversation fairly quickly. And I can understand the concerns, but it was unfortunate considering the extent of which this teacher was just crossing the line, not only regarding the law that we have in the states, regarding the separation of church and state, as well as the First Amendment of our Constitution, but in more simple terms, you just don't contradict another department's curriculum.
Yeah.
It's just something you don't do.
And what about parents? Your own parents, of course, and parents of other students. Did this get outside of the school and cause any uproar?
Well, we didn't want it to get outside of the school originally. In fact, what had happened was I had recorded a few of the classes privately, and then I brought that to the attention of my principal in the school, and he didn't seem to care. So eventually we had a meeting where the teacher denied making almost every single comment that he actually made in class. And in addition to that, he said things like, I have 4 kids, one has a kidney disease. Essentially, if I lose my job and my kid gets sick, it's going to be your fault. Right. And so all that happened, but by the end of the meeting, I told him I had recorded the class. And with that recording, it wasn't until the 3rd day that I was recording that I actually told my parents that I was doing this. And I remember my dad was sitting at the computer, popped in the CD, and he just went crazy because it was just so out of line. I mean, not just general preaching, but telling students that if they don't believe what he believes, they belong in hell.
That's quite scary.
Right, but it really was. Yeah. But other parents in the school, as well as just in the town, for the most part, the only ones that spoke were against me. And in fact, I even had a few people that I knew beforehand that I was friends with, and they ended up going against me, speaking out in local Board of Education meetings. Even one of my former school nurses, I saw one of those meetings, essentially calling me a liar. And it was really frightening to see that.